Bhopal Gas Leak. On the night of December 2nd, 1984, the people of Bhopal, India went to sleep as normal. By morning, thousands of them were dead, and 500,000 more would carry the consequences for the rest of their lives. The Union Carbide pesticide plant sat on the edge of the city, surrounded by densely packed neighborhoods where hundreds of thousands of people lived. The plant used methyl isocyanate, an extraordinarily toxic chemical, to produce a widely used agricultural pesticide. That night, maintenance workers were cleaning pipes connected to a storage tank holding 42 tons of the substance. Water entered the tank. Exactly how remains disputed, but what happened next is not. The water triggered a violent chemical reaction. Temperature and pressure inside the tank climbed rapidly. Safety systems designed to contain such a scenario were either offline, malfunctioning, or simply not enough. At 12:56 a.m., a relief valve burst open, releasing a dense, toxic cloud that rolled silently through the streets, hugging the ground, seeping under doors and through windows directly into the most densely populated neighborhoods in the city. People woke up choking, eyes burning, unable to breathe. Many ran outside, straight into the cloud. Others never woke up at all. Thousands died within days. More than 500,000 people were exposed. Long-term death estimates reach as high as 20,000. Survivors suffered chronic illness for decades. Legal battles dragged on for years, with many victims receiving little to nothing. Bhopal was not a freak accident. It was the predictable result of cost-cutting, neglected safety systems, and a company that decided the risk was acceptable until it wasn't. Deepwater Horizon. On the evening of April 20th, 2010, workers on the Deepwater Horizon oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico felt two massive explosions tear through the platform. 11 of them didn't make it off. What followed was the largest accidental marine oil spill in recorded history. BP's rig was drilling one of the deepest wells ever attempted, nearly 18,000 feet below the ocean surface. The project was already 43 days behind schedule and significantly over budget, and that pressure was felt at every level of decision-making. In the days before the explosion, engineers flagged concerns about the integrity of the well's cement casing. A critical pressure test showed anomalous readings. Both were explained away. To save time, the crew removed the heavy drilling mud from the well before a permanent seal had been properly set, a decision that left the well with almost no protection against a blowout. That night, methane gas surged up the drill column, hit the rig, and ignited. A massive fireball lit up the night sky above the Gulf. The blowout preventer, the last mechanical line of defense, sitting on the ocean floor a mile below, failed to seal the well. For 87 straight days, oil poured into the Gulf of Mexico, nearly 5 million barrels in total, spreading across the surface of the ocean in a dark, expanding stain visible from space. More than 1,300 miles of coastline were contaminated. Fisheries, wildlife, and ecosystems across the Gulf were devastated for years. Birds coated in oil, beaches blackened, entire fishing communities with no catch to bring in. BP ultimately paid over $65 billion in fines, cleanup costs, and settlements. Deepwater Horizon was a disaster built from shortcuts, each one small enough to justify in the moment, catastrophic in combination. Thalidomide Tragedy. In the late 1950s, a pharmaceutical company told the world their new drug was so safe it was virtually impossible to overdose on. They marketed it to pregnant women for morning sickness. They were catastrophically wrong. Thalidomide was developed in West Germany and approved with strikingly little testing. No adequate trials were conducted on pregnant animals. The drug was aggressively marketed as mild and completely harmless, made available over the counter in many countries, and prescribed by doctors across Europe, Canada, Australia, and beyond. Advertisements showed smiling mothers. Doctors handed out samples freely. Between 1957 and 1962, the consequences became impossible to ignore. Approximately 10,000 babies were born with severe limb deformities, missing or drastically shortened arms and legs, some born with hands attached directly to their shoulders. Thousands more were stillborn. Many survivors also suffered damage to their eyes, ears, and internal organs. The link to thalidomide took years to confirm. By then, the drug had reached over 40 countries. The United States was largely spared, not by luck, but because of one woman. FDA reviewer Frances Kelsey repeatedly refused to approve thalidomide without adequate safety data. Despite significant pressure from the manufacturer, her persistence protected thousands of American children. Everywhere else, the damage was permanent. Thalidomide forced a complete overhaul of drug testing and approval standards worldwide, but it required 10,000 children to pay the price before the world decided that probably safe wasn't good enough. Fukushima nuclear disaster. On March 11, 2011, A magnitude 9.0 earthquake struck off the coast of Japan, one of the most powerful ever recorded. The ground shook for 6 minutes. The Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant survived the quake itself. What came next was the problem nobody had properly prepared for. The earthquake triggered a massive tsunami. Walls of water up to 45 feet high came crashing into the Japanese coastline, swallowing entire towns in minutes. The Fukushima plant had backup diesel generators, critical systems designed to keep the reactors cool in exactly this kind of emergency. Engineers and regulators had previously flagged the risk of flooding at the site and recommended moving the generators to higher ground. That recommendation was never acted on. The generators were installed in the basement. When the tsunami hit, they flooded within minutes and shut down completely. Without power, the cooling systems failed. Workers watched helplessly as temperatures inside the reactors climbed beyond control. Over the following days, 3 reactors overheated and melted down, releasing radioactive material into the air and ocean. It was the worst nuclear disaster since Chernobyl. More than 154,000 people were evacuated from the surrounding area, leaving behind homes, farms, and entire towns that emptied overnight. Large zones around the plant remain uninhabitable to this day. The cleanup operation is expected to take decades and cost hundreds of billions of dollars. Fukushima is proof that knowing about a danger and doing something about it are two very different things, and that the gap between them can be catastrophic. Challenger disaster. On January 28, 1986, millions of Americans, many of them school children watching from their classrooms, saw Space Shuttle Challenger break apart in a clear blue sky just 73 seconds after launch. All 7 crew members were killed. Among the crew was Krista McAuliffe, a school teacher selected to become the first civilian to teach from space. Schools across the country had tuned in specifically to watch her launch. The launch had already been delayed 6 times. The night before liftoff, engineers at Morton Thiokol, the company that built the solid rocket boosters, made an urgent call to NASA. The rubber O-ring seals in the booster joints were not rated for cold temperature, and that morning was going to be bitterly cold. They presented charts and data from previous launches, showing O-ring damage in low temperatures. They drew diagrams. They asked NASA to wait. NASA pushed back hard. The mission had been delayed too many times. There was public pressure. There was political pressure. President Reagan was scheduled to reference the mission in his State of the Union address that very evening. Under that pressure, Thiokol management overruled their own engineers and signed off on the launch. The O-ring failed exactly as the engineers had warned. A jet of flame burned through the external fuel tank. The shuttle broke apart at 48,000 feet, leaving a forked trail of smoke across the sky that millions watched in silence. The Rogers Commission left no ambiguity. The disaster was foreseeable and preventable. The engineers were right. They were just ignored. Challenger remains the most powerful example in history of what happens when the people making decisions stop listening to the people who actually know. The Aral Sea Disaster. In 1960, the Aral Sea was the 4th largest lake in the world, a vast, thriving body of water supporting entire communities, ecosystems, and a fishing industry that fed tens of thousands of people. Today, it has almost entirely disappeared. And unlike most disasters in this video, nobody can claim they didn't see it coming. In the 1960s, Soviet central planners made a deliberate decision to divert the 2 rivers that fed the Aral Sea, the Amu Darya and the Syr Darya, to irrigate cotton fields across Central Asia. Scientists warned explicitly that this would cause the sea to disappear. They were dismissed. The irrigation canals were poorly built, losing enormous volumes of water to leakage and evaporation before it even reached the fields. Decade by decade, the shoreline retreated. Maps had to be redrawn. Fishing villages found themselves stranded miles from the water's edge. Boats that once sailed a thriving sea now sat rusting in open desert, surrounded by cracked, dry earth. The fishing industry collapsed entirely, taking entire communities with it. As the seabed dried, it became a vast, toxic salt flat, laced with decades of accumulated pesticides and agricultural chemicals. Windstorms picked up the poisoned dust and carried it hundreds of miles, contaminating water supplies, farmland, and the lungs of millions of people across the region. Cancer rates and infant mortality surged in surrounding communities. Satellite images showed the sea shrinking decade by decade like a puddle drying in the sun. The Aral Sea is the starkest possible reminder that environmental destruction on this scale is always a choice, and that when we ignore the warnings, nature doesn't negotiate.